Hello everyone, I'm Yasmin Taj, editor ETHRWorld International and head of branded content, The Economic Times. And it is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this video interview series brought to you by ETHRWorld Southeast Asia in association with Enparadigm on the theme Talent Management and Development for the Future of Work. It is true that works today may not be that efficient the next very day, and we have somehow adapted to this hyper-dynamism. Companies may have reinvented the workspaces, but they still need to redefine connections for a fragmented workforce and power their performance while giving them a sense of belonging and purpose, which has been a persistent challenge for our HR and business leaders today. Powering talent and helping them grow and build a trajectory, most importantly, has been the top priority for leaders worldwide. As part of this interview series with Enparadigm, we will decode some of the key tenets of the talent management function while discussing the significance of learning in helping organizations build and develop the future talent pipeline. And for this episode of the series here in Singapore, it is our pleasure to welcome Aditi Mahadevan Nair, Head of Human Resources for APAC, Barclays, and John Cherian, the CEO of Enparadigm. Based in Singapore, Aditi joined the bank in 2022 to run the Asia Pacific HR function and shape the culture of the bank. She is part of the BBPLC HR leadership team and the Asia Pacific Executive Forum. Aditi joined Barclays from Citibank, where she spent around 18 years in a variety of senior HR leadership roles in the Asia Pacific region and was initially based in India before relocating to Singapore 11 years ago. Prior to that, Aditi worked at Bharti Airtel, a large telecommunications business in India. And we have also with us John Cherian, who's CEO of Enparadigm, who is driven by the potential of purpose-driven business to make the world more meaningful. His endeavor to make the complex simple and his belief in the power of learning to make people and businesses better has been the significant driving force in the Enparadigm journey. So a very warm welcome to you, John and Aditi. Thank you for joining us for this episode. And without any further ado, let's begin the conversation. So, Aditi, what's your point of view on the shifting trends driving the talent management and development function in 2023? What are some of the new trends that you're seeing now?
So thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to be a part of this panel with John. I would say, navigating complex, tough, challenging circumstances is probably the reality of today, which most talent and learning leaders are grappling with. And I think the biggest challenge that they have is the fact that skills across the board are constantly changing. So if I look at one of the biggest challenges that sort of currently encompasses what we practitioners do is the fact that how do we constantly upskill, reskill our workforces on an ongoing basis. So one of the things that I would like to say is that when you look at skills, there are many aspects of skills. So one is just skilling people, right? The new workforce that is coming into the world, whether it's from universities or other arena. How do you make sure that they have those skills and capabilities which are relevant for today, plus they have the relevance for the world tomorrow. The second one is, of course, reskilling and upskilling. How do you make a workforce that is not just ready to take on the challenges that is in front of them today, but also how are they constantly learning and have that agility to look at the future. So I think as practitioners, we have the responsibility to our organizations and to the leaders that we are constantly developing a workforce which is diverse, which has both technical and cognitive skills, which make them extremely successful today, but also prepared for the future.
That's a great point, actually. I think we need that kind of talent which is agile enough to adapt to the constant disruptions that the world of work is going through. And they keep, upgrading themselves, upskilling themselves, reskilling themselves as to what is the requirement of the changing business dynamic also. So great thoughts. Any thoughts around that, John? What kind of trends are you seeing in the whole talent development spaces today?
Yeah, so there's been a huge shift in this space. What we're seeing is organizations, in terms of the way they're spending on talent, there's been a big shift in the last 10 years. There's an increasing recognition that learning and development contributes a lot to the organization's ROI, business ROI, right? And what we're seeing increasingly is that, business leaders are now coming back to the L&D function and saying, what can we do things which are more long-term, which are more sustainable for us. And the reason why they're doing that is because they recognize that a lot of org strategies today cannot really be driven top-down, right? It's a VUCA world.
Yeah.
So you need, so hierarchy is not really what drives outcomes. You need a bit of self-organizing teams at different levels in the organization, right? So how do you enable those self-organizing teams? How do you enable people to understand what's happening in the world around them and understand, therefore, how do they configure themselves, how do they configure the teams around them?
Yeah.
And how do they deliver on the outcomes that they are responsible
Yeah,
for,
yeah.
right? And the L&D function has to follow based
True,
on that.
true. I think I totally agree. Since the pandemic struck, I think the whole focus on people, how ready are they for the future and the present, that the kind of changes that were happening, the transformations, it brought back the whole focus on people by the business also. So the business started realizing how important it is to have people who are skilled in the right manner, who have the right skills to, move along and walk along with the changes in business. So great thoughts. Thanks for sharing that. Now, speaking of some of the challenges that are emerging now, we've seen a world pre 2020, we've
Yep.
seen a world since 2020. So the 3 years in the middle were very, very transformative for True, but there were many challenges too. So, what kind of talent shifts have you seen? Some of the big challenges that you've seen, and how do you think our HR leaders navigating these? Aditi, I'd like
Yeah.
to hear from you first.
I think you're absolutely right. I think we've gone through some unprecedented times,
Yeah.
right? No one would have imagined how our ways of working and living would change, and how technology would have an impact in the way we are interacting with everybody. So I think that's probably been the biggest challenge, as to how we are constantly thinking of the impact that these changes are having on us. And also encouraging our employees to think about the fact that the skills that they have today may not get them to tomorrow. So for us as leaders, to encourage them to have that sort of developmental mindset at an ongoing basis is extremely important. And hence that has to be linked to business outcomes, right?
Absolutely.
The fact that it is yes, personal growth and development, but it also helps them enable drive business outcomes in an appropriate manner. So, and that's where the entire linkage sort of gets very strong, when you have your ecosystem, which helps them not constantly reskill and upskill themselves. They find really sort of value in that, because of the fact that they see their ability to reskill, plus find opportunities for mobility within the organization. And also at some times when they are looking for sort of career shifts and changes, that is quite an enabling factor. I would say just within our organization, we do have a number of schemes which actually in a very structured manner enable that process, make sure that the upskilling is sort of linked to current roles and future roles, plus is also linked to very definitive career paths. So people know what they are getting into in a very robust manner. So I would say that there are challenges, but I think the world has also enabled technology to help overcome some of those challenges in a very appropriate manner.
Yeah, I think technology was the one factor that helped us pivot to whatever happened since 2020 took place. I think, and even in the learning landscape, I think it made a major progression, because
Yeah.
people started to learn from anywhere, anytime.
Yes.
It became self-paced. So that way, it did play that role in helping people upskill themselves to the level that the company or the business required at that time. What are your thoughts around that, John? What challenges have you seen specifically in this landscape?
Yeah, so I think when we started this interview, you talked about, you mentioned the word fragmented.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the big challenges that is facing organizations today is also that while the world is moving very fast, and while we've been able to use technology to make sure that there's business continuity, right?
Yeah.
Even with a lot of disruptions around us, it's kind of also increasingly led to a lot of fragmentation, right? So as an individual employee, am I still feeling that same purpose? Do I feel aligned with the organization, or am I just there to collect a paycheck, right? And am I just looking at it from paycheck to paycheck? And who employs me may not matter so much, right? So where are our employees in this whole continuum, right? How much are they working with purpose versus how much are they working for paycheck, right? And I think that becomes a big challenge.
It is.
Right? So when we look at technology, I think that we have to be very careful as to how to ensure that balance is not destroyed, right? Because technology has this way of dehumanizing a lot of things,
Yeah.
right?
True.
And even within learning, I think we've always seen organizations always swinging back and forth between human-led or facilitator-led learning, where you want more human touch, versus digital learning where you want more scale, more cost effectiveness, right? And it's always a constant back and forth battle,
Yeah.
right? So how do you keep balance, and that becomes very important.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So now tell me, John, how have the expectations of the workforce changed since the whole hybrid workspace came into place? And, the kind of career development that the new kind of workforce is looking for, they want purpose, they want different things now. So how else, especially when it comes to their own career development and journey, what expectations are you seeing come up from the current talent pipeline?
Yes, I think there's a huge shift as the percentage of Gen X in the workforce
Yeah,
keeps going down year on year,
yeah, it does.
right? You have millennials in the middle, and then you have Gen Z, right? And there is definitely a different kind of mindset in all three, generations, right? So Gen X, for due to the backgrounds that Gen X came from, it was a very different world when they entered the corporate workforce, right? And while I don't want to stereotype, right, there is definitely a preference for security, stability, safety. The
Yes.
preferences for these attributes are typically much higher in the Gen X population, right? When it came to millennials, the preference for more autonomy over hierarchy, preferences for more control over how I work, that became very important, right? And now with Gen Z, it's not just about how I work, it's also about where I work.
Yeah,
Yes.
It's also about
Yeah.
whom I work with.
absolutely.
It's also about why I'm working,
Yeah.
right? So when you say purpose, it's
very
about why,
interesting. Yes, yes.
right? So you have to see that people are thinking very differently,
Yeah.
right? There are so many more companies giving job offers today, right? Because there are so many more startups.
Absolutely.
So Gen Z has obviously a bigger plethora of options on the table. And there's also so much of technology where, you don't have to be a full-time employee, right? There are many different kind of talent contracts today.
Yeah.
So if you're Gen Z, you have a lot of options, right? And many times you're actually confused, right? Because there's just so much choice, right? And therefore, as an organization, how do you factor that, right? And how do you become an employer of choice for Gen Z? It's a very different question from how you were an employer of choice for Gen X or for millennials, right? And you also find that you have Gen X, you have millennials, and you have Gen Z, and you have millennials who are kind of sandwiched between both these generations, right? The leaders in many cases are Gen X,
Yeah.
right? But their teams are Gen Z,
Gen Z. Yeah.
right? And they have to keep swinging back and forth and ensuring that there's alignment.
Yeah. The
Right.
managers, especially, are millennials, I think. Yeah.
Correct. A lot of the managers today are millennials.
Yeah, most of them.
So they can relate to Gen X. They can also relate
To Gen Zs.
to Gen Z,
Yeah.
right? But they have to ensure that both these generations are also talking to each other,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
right? And the good thing is, the leaders are conscious of this, right? So you see a lot of organizations doing reverse mentoring, right, where you have Gen Z coming in and training
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
millennials and
Yeah.
Gen X, right? Why? Because that's how we get to understand, how you guys are thinking,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So some of these things are what we are seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because with multi generations, you have multi perspectives, multi backgrounds. I mean, there's so much to look at it. But yes, if we can create career journeys and paths based on how we can learn from each other, I think that's the right way to have create those kind of journeys, peer to peer learning. Learning from each other. I think that's very, very important. Any thoughts around that, Aditi? Maybe any example of how is it being done here at Barclays?
Yeah, so if I could just add a couple of things there,
Yeah.
right? So today we expect the workforce to be agile, to be flexible, to be adaptable, to be inquisitive, right?
Yes.
And what's most important so that they get all these characteristics is that they have a very open mind to development and learning, right? So they have to have a mindset that, they need to embrace everything that's coming and also make it very relevant for themselves. I could completely relate when he spoke about the differences in generation, and that's why I think, technology has played a very critical role, but it's also a very sort of fine balance, right? I think from a point of time where pre-COVID everything was physical to during COVID where everything turned virtual to now the need for having a hybrid, plus also giving people choice. I think that's most important. The workforce
Yes.
today expects to have a choice of saying that, I will choose my learning methodology. I will choose the content that I want. I will
Yeah.
choose the skills that I need to build.
Yeah.
And that's become very critical.
Yes.
So I think that flexibility, as we have learned being in both very isolated worlds, pre-COVID and during COVID, has helped us learn a lot, right?
Yeah.
So as organizations, when we are curating content or we are, enabling content, with various platforms, we are figuring out that balance is really important, right? And the balance is important for choice. The balance is also important so that you can embrace diversity and help people build those networks from where they can learn, right? So it's not pushing content from one end and they are going to sort of just suddenly absorb, but they also want to value the learning that they get from peer-to-peer learning. So I think this shift that has happened in the last 2-3 years, personally I feel is very relevant and is something that all of us need to sort of embrace and look at it as something that we've learned, and which I think from a workforce standpoint, I think it'll just be better for the future.
Yeah, true. I think you rightly said that they want a choice. I think they also want a voice and they want to be heard. So it's very important that even if you're creating their learning journeys, you listen to what their needs are and align it to, of course, your business outcomes also. But the creating that entire alignment between all of this is the only way to go forward. If you want to retain them, keep them engaged, give them the motivation and purpose to stay with the organization. So I think their learning journeys have to be crafted that way. So thanks for sharing that. Coming to the most in-demand skills, what Aditi are the top 3 skills for you today?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the skills, you can actually list out 10 of them, but I'm just going to list out the top 3. So I think it's not something people may not have heard. One I would say is technology and data. I think 2 big sort of skills: technology, just understanding how technology works and how it can impact and make work and life better. I think that's one. The second is data and insights. There is so much of data and information available all over, which I won't say it wasn't available earlier. People didn't know the power of data. So just harnessing that power and making powerful decisions out of that data is extremely critical. And I would say the third thing, which has been there and will continue to be, is having a very customer centric or customer focused approach at everything that you're doing, putting the end user in mind. I'm just correlating to the discussion we just had. Are we putting the end learner in mind before we're devising content for them? Similarly, from a business imperative, do we have the clients in mind before we're strategizing anything? So like I said, the list can go on, but that sort of are the top 3 that come to my mind.
I think those are very interesting. I think because data is the new currency, and if you don't understand data, you have nowhere to go basically in today's times. And of course, digital skills are important. And as you said, a customer-centric mindset, very, very key. In, it goes even when you look at your employees as customers, you tend to treat them better and understand what works most. So you treat them better, they treat your customers better. So I think that's the way. Top 3 skills for you, John.
Yeah, so we've all heard stories of the CEO who used to have that extra chair in the boardroom. Right? And the empty chair, right? With the message to the management that, while we're all here, we are all making decisions for this person who's not here, who's a customer.
That's very nice.
Yeah, so I think I agree with Aditi. I would resonate with the same 3 skills, right? I would want people to maybe look at the customer or the employee or the user first.
Yes.
Right, because a lot of what you're trying to do with technology, or a lot of what you're trying to do with data, really follows from your understanding of that person, right? So I think number 1 would be, what we call user empathy, right?
Nice.
Empathy for, someone else for whom you are doing what you're doing, right? Who may not look like you, who may not be sitting with you, who may not be in the same place as you, right? But is in some way you're actually working for that person. Right, so that becomes very important, right? And when it comes to data, I think from a learning solution provider perspective, one of the things that we see is when clients ask for data-related skills, a lot of learning solutions end up going into the technical aspects of data, right? But what I believe is it's not really the technical aspects of data. It's not about how well do you know regression and correlation that really matters. What matters a lot is, how do I take decisions? If I need to take a decision, right, what data do I need? What data do I have? How can I analyze that data in a very consistent, rigorous manner? And how do I make a coherent decision?
Exactly.
Right? So in my understanding, these are the skills that become very important, right? The technical aspects of data, then of course you can always go deeper and deeper. but it's important not to lose the the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is very
Nice.
important,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Anyone in a very senior management role would say, you know what, I don't want the details. Let's just summarize the problem, summarize the outcome we need, right? And summarize maybe in 3 steps what is the approach,
Yeah.
right? So anyone who is going to go with data has to just do that. That is when the conversation is very powerful,
Yes.
right?
Interesting.
So even when you talk about data, these are the kind of skill sets that you probably need to build for people a lot more than technical analysis of data,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
right? And of course, technology, no escaping from technology.
Yes.
It creates barriers, but it also unites.
Yeah.
So how do you design things for bringing in the right kind of technology
Yeah.
solution?
Yeah.
That becomes very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great points. I think these are the skills that are not just relevant today but will remain relevant even in the future. Because many other skills will come and go. The shelf life of skills is not
Yes.
really long these days, right? But some of these, I think, I still feel like, be it empathy, be it digital skills, be it data, these are going to be there for quite a while now. So I'm hoping that's how the workplaces will evolve also.
Yeah.
Now, talking about solidifying the whole learning experience, Aditi, what do you think? How can we develop and nurture the existing pool of talent that you have, make them future ready, and also create a culture of that continuous learning for them? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. And maybe here is where I can share the kind of ecosystem Barclays has,
Yes.
right? So obviously creating creative learning solutions where things are available on time, which
Yeah.
is very critical, plus available at anywhere, easily accessible is extremely important. So what we have at Barclays is something called Barclays Learning Lab, which is an ecosystem. An ecosystem which has content from various sources. So one is, of course, content that Barclays has created, right, which could be around a number of different topics which are very core to our ethos and values, which is sort of augmented by content which is available from digital content providers. So if there is a topic, you obviously know what's happening within the organization, but you also get a content or a validation from external sources. So I think that ecosystem, and this is all sort of readily available to everybody across the organization. Also, what we do is that we try and link this learning to specific career pathways, which makes it a lot more relevant for
Yeah.
them. And that's a process that the teams constantly revalidate. So, if you were to look at those pathways a few years back, may have looked very differently from what they'll sort of look today. So I think amalgamating, content with what's relevant to the roles and building future skills is something that we constantly are sort of looking at doing. I would say that the other key important thing is really business sponsorship. Right, a lot of things we do say that we've sort of democratized learning to quite an extent, and we ourselves need to reach out to the resources that's available. But sponsorship from the top, and also making sure that they are driving that entire culture of learning agility is extremely critical, and that's something that we want to make sure that it sort of lands across the organization. And I think the last but not the least, the one thing that you did mention is that is the learning purposeful and need-based, right? So is it building an organization which will enable them to look at future is really important. So I would say that's how we are sort of building that entire ecosystem, and with obviously a balance of what we've learned through COVID. I think the future is going to be a blended hybrid kind of a learning scenario.
Yeah, hybrid. I think blended approach also. Any final thoughts around that, John? How do you think we can build that entire learning environment?
So I think a few thoughts I'm going to maybe take on from where Aditi left, right? So one is the aspect of business sponsorship.
True.
Right? Because finally, how is it that we can take the learning and take it back to the business value chain?
Yeah.
How are you going to help drive top line, bottom line innovation? That's not something that the learning function is going to drive for you, right? So how do you work together, business with learning?
Yeah.
Right? And one of the big challenges you have in being able to do that effectively is the whole aspect of what I call unconscious incompetence, right? Or you don't know what you don't know, right? So it becomes very challenging to figure out what the right balance is, because if business already knows something, then there's no need to learn it, right? If business doesn't know something, then you don't know that you don't know it.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of maintain
Yeah.
that
That's interesting.
that
Yeah.
dialogue?
Yeah.
How do you discover something together? It becomes it's always a challenging role for the learning function,
Yeah.
right? But at the same time, how do you lead the conversation with business on solutioning?
Yeah.
So I think that becomes very important, right? The business is not going to solution. Business is going to say, hey, I'm facing these challenges, right? So learning has to lead with solutioning, but probably support with execution,
Execution also.
right?
Yeah.
And it's quite difficult for the learning function to get this balance right,
I agree.
right? Because many times we end up supporting with solutioning, but trying to lead with execution.
Yeah.
And that is where the business
Yeah.
ownership, they say, okay, you guys are driving it, just go ahead and drive it. You know?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Yeah.
that really doesn't work,
Yeah.
right? Because finally, I have to, if I am a user or if I'm a corporate learner, I need to own it and I need to use it and I need to implement it.
Exactly.
Then the learning
Yeah.
works,
Yeah.
right? So how do we get that balance becomes
Yeah.
very critical.
Yeah, as you very rightly, how do you make learning very contextual to each person in the organization and also the business? So what I pick up from the entire conversation today for me is relevance for the business, relevance for the the employee, and relevance for the whole ecosystem there, and also for the future. So if you want to stay relevant, you have to be relevant to the business. You have to have the relevant kind of learning, and have that. The company has to have that kind of an ecosystem, which creates such kind of relevance by, and hence creating a future-ready workforce. So I think that's the key word here, because the evolution will keep happening, disruptions will keep happening, the learning landscape will keep changing. So how do you be agile enough to keep on matching up to that? I think that's the key here. So thank you so much on that note, John
you.
and Aditi. It was a wonderful conversation, so much to learn from the both of you, and look forward to seeing you again and learning more from you. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Take care.
Thanks,
Yeah,
John.
bye.
Thanks, Yasmin.